Okay, so I'm going to talk us through a little bit of comprehension of Act 1 because Act 1 lays the groundwork for the rest of the play. Act 1 has to establish setting, it has to establish character, and it has to foreshadow the conflict or bring in the conflict that is going to drive the play. So Act 1, Scene 1, we've talked about at length almost, and it occurs on the gun platform. The characters that it introduces are the two guards, Marcellus and Bernardo, and Horatio. And Horatio is in this scene introduced as doubting their claims to have seen the ghost. Then at the end of the scene, we have the ghost appear. He doesn't have any speech, but we find out from the others that he is dressed in full armor as though he's in battle, and that he is the complete likeness of the dead King Hamlet. The purpose of Act 1, Scene 1 is to give some backstory, so to tell us the events that have occurred before the play begins, which is King Hamlet having defeated Norway and won some land off old King Fortinbras and killed him in the process. It's to give us some context about what is going on outside of the physical space the play is in. So it has Marcellus ask, why is Denmark on such high guard? Why do we have so many guards out? Why are people collecting steel to make weapons? What is going on? Why are we preparing for war? And we have the answer come for that question, which is that they are worried now that their king is dead, that young Fortinbras is going to make an attack to win back those lands. And then we have the suggestion that the ghost, that says God, sorry, the ghost must be a bad omen, and they decide that their course of action is going to be to tell Hamlet, because maybe it will speak with Hamlet because it looks like his dad. So in terms of characterization in this scene, I'm going to look at Horatio and some of the lines that Horatio speaks. So Horatio is often described by the other characters as logical, sensible, or even skeptical, but he is definitely ruled by the logical side of his brain. He initially doubts the existence of the ghost. He responds differently to the ghost than the other characters do, and he has the trust or ear of Hamlet and believes that he will be able to break the news to Hamlet about the ghost in a way that won't disturb his already kind of fragile state, given his dad has just died. So I've got these two pieces of text here for you, and I'd like you to have a look at those two pieces and see if you can find all of the hints that Horatio is the logical skeptic. Then have a look at the final lines in the scene, and for yourself, answer what is the purpose of the image of daybreak that Horatio gives. So pause the video here and go through those activities, and then I'll talk you through a little bit of what I see. Okay. So Horatio says just before these lines that the ghost tis but, Horatio doesn't say. Horatio is said to have said that the ghost is just the fantasy or sort of mind games of the guards who are maybe tired because they've been up all night, and he's really skeptical. He doesn't believe them. So he's been asked by them to come and have a look himself so that his words, which will be trusted because people believe Horatio because he's so logical, will give weight to what they have seen. He may approve our eyes and speak to it. Then we have Horatio reacting to the ghost, and instead of reacting in complete fear, he actually takes control of the situation. He says, I charge thee, speak. And Marcellus starts to get worried because this is a supernatural being and says, oh no, you've offended it. It's walking away, and Horatio continues to command it. Stay, speak, speak, I charge thee, speak. He's being very dominant and controlling in this sense, not in a negative way, but just in that he appears like a leader of these people. But the ghost doesn't listen to him, and it disappears anyway. And once it disappears, Bernardo says, you tremble and look pale. Do you now believe this is something more than fantasy? And he says, do you know what? If I hadn't seen it just now with my own eyes, and if I didn't have complete trust of my own eyes, I still would not believe it. Then we have him say toward the end of the scene that he does in part believe that the ghost is a bad omen. He's not fully committed, so he's had a bit of a moment now since the apparition disappeared, and he's decided to half commit to believing in the superstition and the bad omen, but not completely. Then he gives us this imagery of the ghost leaving because day was breaking. He says, "But look, the morn, in russet mantle clad, walks o'er the dew of yon high eastward hill. Break we our watch up, and by my advice, let us impart what we have seen tonight unto young Hamlet." And that's a easily missed but really beautiful image of the dawn coming up. So it's written in so that Shakespeare doesn't have to have sets telling us that the night watch has ended. So it's to give us a sense of time moving on. But it is also because the ghost is then inherently aligned with the nighttime, as though it was morning that scared it off. It couldn't stay past morning. And as though night is a time of fear and superstition and darkness, and with morning they can go on to sort of logical actions. And he says that the morning is a person who has a kind of red cloak on, who is walking over the hills toward them to embrace them almost. It's a really positive image in my mind. So the next character that is introduced, even though we don't see them in this text, is Fortinbras. And I want you to have a look at this speech of Horatio's, where he is doing some backstory for the audience, and have a look at how Fortinbras is characterized in the words of Horatio. And we've already established that Horatio seems to be this trustworthy voice of reason character. So what kinds of words is he using to establish the character of Fortinbras? What kind of guy do we assume Fortinbras is? So pause for a minute, answer for yourself in your notebook or on your document, however you take your notes. Okay, so these are the things I noticed that he says of him: that he is of unimproved metal, hot and full. So he has a raw bravery. He has a raw bravery that is ready to spill over. He is absolutely full of it. It is ready to spill over, and it may well impact them when it does. Sharked up, a list of lawless resolutes, suggests that he has been, by very aggressive, shark-like means, recruiting kind of rebels, people who normally exist outside of the law, and is getting them to be on his side and prepare them. That half a stomach in it is again about his bravery and his strength. It would sort of turn other people's stomachs. It takes someone with a bravery to do the kind of action and be on Fortinbras's side. So you can imagine the kind of men that he's recruited. And then he says that by a strong hand and terms compulsory, that he's going to take back those lands that his father lost. And we have an image of strength, I almost associate it with masculinity, and that he is going to bend people to his will. There will be no consultation. This is not going to be diplomatic. This is going to be violent, and he is going to make it happen. So you can draw some inferences about the kind of person Fortinbras is from the description used there by Horatio. Okay, so as this scene develops, we need to look at the characterization in the court scene and the introduction to court and to the inside of Elsinore Castle, at the characterization of primarily Gertrude and Claudius to begin with. And characterization happens in a couple of ways in texts. It happens through what the characters do, their actions. It happens through what they say and how they say it. Now, when we are talking about tone, we need to make sure that we're talking about the evidence for the tone that comes from the text and the written word itself, and not from the way the actors say it. So we're focusing in our analysis, in our essays, if we're going to talk about tone as you interpret it from the evidence of the written word of the text itself. So then they can also be characterized by their interactions with other characters, how they treat other characters and how they respond to the things that occur around them. And then finally, this is primarily in reference to texts that have narrators, but it does occur, like we looked at with Horatio describing Laertes, they can be characterized through their description, how other people refer to them and speak about them and describe them in conversation. So there are 4 main modes of characterization. I really want to stress for you, so you don't make this mistake in your essay, that although we're using films as a tool to understand the text and to see the text performed, that you cannot analyze characterization in your essay by looking at the costuming or physical appearance of the characters as they appear in the film. You can only look at physical appearance as it has been written into the script. So everything that's been interpreted by this particular filmmaker and production and director isn't really relevant. What is relevant is what is given to you in the written word. We're responding to the text and not to the film. So don't be accidentally doing film analysis and telling me about their costume or camera angles or things like that that aren't actually part of Shakespeare's written word. That's really important. So take a minute to look at this scene and look at the ways that Gertrude and Claudius are characterized. Try and find examples of each type of characterization that you can. So examples of their actions, examples of their speech and what we interpret from their speech, and examples of their interactions and description if it's relevant. Finally, in this scene, we have Hamlet speak for himself, and he does this in his first soliloquy with nobody else around him, and so he's speaking to himself, but also to the audience. The audience is there. We get to see him having this internal personal moment. And this is the "to solid flesh would melt" speech. So what I need you to do initially, in a minute I'll tell you to pause the screen, is to have a look at this speech and to map for yourself the different emotions that are conveyed through this speech. So what is the emotional journey almost that occurs for Hamlet through this speech? Where does it shift and how do you know? And then I want you to look at who Hamlet is most angered or upset by. What is it that has really got him offside? And how can you tell? Okay, pause. All right, so here's what I see in this speech. So I see that initially he feels rather hopeless, and people mostly interpret this opening as about a wish to die, to cease to be. That if he could just melt into the ground and become something else, he would. Short of that, since that's not possible, he wishes that it weren't sinful to end one's own life, self-slaughter. And then he addresses God in this despairing, hopeless kind of state twice. It's exclamatory. Then he starts to explain his viewpoint a little bit, and he tells us in these next lines how he views the world, and it's really negative. It's extremely negative. We have this imagery come up of the unweeded garden that goes to seed. So something that is out of control, it's out of man's control. A garden is something that is made by man, and when it's gone rank and to seed, it has broken that control or that order that man has put upon it, and it's gone back into this natural kind of seething imagery of something bad and corrupt, a garden corrupt. So that's there. Then we have something interesting happen with the way this is written, where in the yellow you actually have the beginning of an idea that is interrupted by a reminisce. So he says, "But 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. And then he reflects back and he talks about his father and he starts to make those comparisons. But this is really reflective. It's a process of memory. And I think the way that it is written with all of the punctuation and with these 2 yellow bits that almost act like parentheses, where an idea is begun and then not finished, mimic the way the mind works. And so we can tell he's already upset. And he's stuck in this place of how awful his current situation is. It makes him reflect on his past. So he tells us about his dad, and he tells us about how great his dad was, and then he tells us about his mum, how good his dad was to his mum, and how much she appeared to love him really, really genuinely. And of course, that makes far worse the betrayal. Sorry, I accidentally changed the slide already there, but it makes worse the betrayal that he suffered of his mum going to bed with Claudius. So Hamlet really, at this point, is most upset by his mother's actions and not by Claudius seducing her or taking her, if you will. He sees her to be at fault. It's a betrayal of him and his dad. Then we have Act 1, Scene 3, and Act 1, Scene 3 is all about Ophelia. It takes place in a different room within the castle. You can imagine that the actors exit, but in a film we cut to this place where we have Ophelia with her dad Polonius and her brother Laertes. And Laertes is having an exchange with Ophelia where he airs a whole bunch of concerns. So what I want you to do is to look at that interaction and the speeches and replies of Laertes and Ophelia and answer these questions. What is Laertes concerned about happening to Ophelia while he is away? So what is he worried is going to happen now that he goes back to France? He's got permission to leave. What does Laertes think will be the main problem preventing Hamlet from committing honourably to Ophelia and doing the right thing? What might be the consequences for Ophelia if she gives in to Hamlet's affections? And what types of metaphors in these passages in the scene are being used to describe each of the following things: love, lust, chastity or virginity, and youth? Have a look at those for me. So, the final question is, do you believe Laertes to be patronising her, possessive of her, or sincere in this speech? How do you interpret it? Finally, we have Act 1, Scene 4 and 5, which I'm going to breeze over Scene 4 a little bit, but it's basically Horatio convincing Hamlet to come and have a watch, and he goes on the watch with them, and the ghost appears, and the ghost beckons Hamlet to go with it in order to speak to him. And he does. He goes off alone with the ghost, and that's what introduces Scene 5. We have just the ghost and Hamlet, and no one else is privy to the information that the ghost gives Hamlet. They don't hear it. So the ghost charges Hamlet in this scene with avenging his wrongful death, which happened at the hands of Claudius. So primarily, we want to look at Hamlet's attitude toward the ghost, and I want you to have a look at this speech and figure out for yourself, where is there evidence of Hamlet being conflicted in his feelings toward the ghost? What does he see as the possible, very different reasons that the ghost has appeared, and just pointing out some evidence that you would use to justify your claims. And this is important because it's that inner conflict that really builds Hamlet as a character and that comes back to haunt him over and over again through the remainder of the play. Finally, we have the ghost do the reveal. So I've stolen this little bit of text from that scene. And these are the questions that I would ask about this part of the text. So what is it the ghost accuses Claudius of? What kind of imagery is associated with Claudius in this scene? And where have we seen this image of weeds and overgrown gardens come up before? How was it used before? Who used it? And what does the ghost wish Hamlet not to do to his mother? And then finally, what is the promise that Hamlet makes to this ghost? And how does Hamlet now feel about this ghost at the end of the scene compared to the conflict that we saw earlier? What does he resolve to do for the ghost? What is his attitude toward it now? Okay, so at the end of Act 1, you should have a strong sense of the setting, the conflict, and the characters, but you should also be able to anticipate what some of the themes are that are going to pervade this play and come up and be explored as the play develops. So having a brainstorm of those possible themes, and I'd really like to hear what we think those themes are at this point, and then whether that was affirmed by what you watched the rest of the play, read the rest of the play, and have a discussion about what you anticipated and what you found to be the main themes, and talk about that together on Monday. So the rest of your job is just to keep watching. Don't get too hung up on following scene by scene, because the play does jump around a bit. It moves the famous to be or not to be speech, but getting a sense of the plot, who does what, who dies and why, and those themes is what's going to be crucial. And thanks so much for playing along.